If you don't want to come, you don't have to.
You will go alone?
Sure.
Stop, William Robinson. I will accompany you. You may need protection.
I'm big enough to take care of myself.
True.
For so many of us, that lost family felt like our own. A comforting little world we returned to again and again on slow afternoons that we wished would never end. We believed every warm smile was real. The truth, however, was something far colder and far sadder, because that happy family secretly despised one another. A forgotten villain quietly hijacked the entire series, and the beloved father at the center slowly watched his dream get stolen right out from under him. Number 15, The Family. The world just said goodbye to. Not long ago, in October of 2025, the world quietly lost June Lockhart, the warm and gentle mother of the Robinson family, who passed away peacefully in her home at the remarkable age of 100. For a whole generation of people who grew up sitting too close to the television, her death felt like losing a member of their own family, because that is exactly what she had become to them over all those years. And she was not the only one the audience had recently said goodbye to, because Mark Goddard, the handsome pilot who flew the family deeper into trouble, had passed away only 2 years earlier, in 2023. What makes this moment so strange and so beautiful is that a brand new audience had only just fallen in love with these characters all over again. When the streaming giant Netflix brought the Robinson family roaring back to life, with a glossy and expensive new version that ran from 2018 all the way through 2021, millions of children who were not even born in the original era suddenly understood why their parents and grandparents adored this story so deeply. The love had never truly died, and it was being passed down like a treasured family heirloom from one generation to the next. Yet, here is the thing that almost nobody in that loving audience ever realized, and it is the reason you are still watching right now. Every single warm smile you saw on that screen was hiding something much colder underneath, because the people playing this happy family were quietly at war with one another, and one of them was secretly stealing the entire show right out from under the others. Number 14. The most expensive pilot in television history had no robot. Before any of the fame, before the catchphrases, before the love, there was a single piece of film so costly that it nearly bankrupted everyone involved before the show had even properly begun. The very first version of Lost in Space, a pilot quietly titled No Place to Hide, carried a price tag of around $600,000, which made it the single most expensive pilot that television had ever produced up to that point in history. To put that into plain terms for you, this one test episode cost more than entire seasons of other shows, and the man behind it was gambling everything he had on it. Now, here is the part that will genuinely surprise you, because the two most beloved and famous faces of the entire series were completely missing from this original version. There was no cowardly Dr. Smith sneaking around the ship causing trouble, and there was no lovable talking robot waving his arms and warning the boy about danger. The truth is that the entire personality of the show you remember, the heart and the soul of the whole thing, was added on almost as an afterthought. Two characters were quietly stitched into the story later to give it more life and more conflict, and absolutely nobody could have predicted what would happen next, because one of those two added characters would go on to hijack the entire series, turning a tense space drama into something nobody had planned, and breaking the heart of the show's leading man in the process. Number 13. The network chose this family over Star Trek. For decades, fans have whispered a juicy little legend that Lost in Space was rushed onto television screens just to crush a rival show before it could even air. And the rival in that story was none other than the now legendary Star Trek. The popular version of events claims these two giants premiered just 1 week apart in a desperate race for the future of science fiction. The reality, however, is far more interesting than the myth, and it reveals just how powerful this little family adventure really was. The genuine truth is that the very same network handling Lost in Space was offered the chance to make Star Trek, and the executives in charge looked at both ideas sitting on their desk and made their choice. They chose the Lost family. They turned the starship away, mostly because they already had a space adventure that they believed in. And that adventure was the Robinsons. Star Trek would not actually reach American living rooms with its first regular episode until a full year later, in the autumn of 1966, long after the Robinsons had already become a household name. So this gentle little show that so many people now dismiss as silly and old-fashioned was once considered the safer and smarter bet over one of the most influential franchises in all of human entertainment. And the man they nearly killed off in the very first stretch of episodes, a sneaky little villain who was supposed to vanish almost immediately, would soon become the single biggest reason the whole world remembered the show at all. Number 12. The villain who quietly stole the entire show. This is the secret at the very center of everything. The betrayal that explains the whole strange history of the series. And once you understand it, you will never watch the show the same way again. The wicked Dr. Zachary Smith, the scheming coward that millions of children loved to boo and laugh at, was never meant to be a main character at all. He was written as a dark and serious traitor, a man who sabotaged the mission and was meant to fade quietly into the background or disappear from the story altogether. The actor who played him, a clever and theatrical man named Jonathan Harris, looked at that grim and forgettable villain and made a bold and quiet decision that changed television forever. He understood something the writers had missed, which was that a one-note bad guy would bore the audience and soon get him written off the show entirely. So he began secretly rewriting his own lines, softening the menace into mischief, adding silly insults and grand dramatic flourishes, and slowly transforming a forgettable traitor into the funniest and most unforgettable character on the screen. He even invented those famous tongue-twisting insults he hurled at the robot, the bubbling and alliterative jabs, dreaming them up at home late into the night. The producer noticed the audience falling head over heels for this comical coward, and instead of stopping it, he handed Harris almost total freedom to do whatever he pleased. And while Harris was quietly climbing to the very top, one proud and powerful actor was watching his own dream get smaller and smaller. And the resentment building inside him would one day drive him clear across the world. Number 11. The leading man who was pushed into the shadows. To understand the heartbreak of what happened next, you have to understand who Guy Williams was before any of this began. Because he did not arrive on this show as a nobody hoping for a break. He came in as a genuine television star, a dashing and beloved hero who had already won millions of hearts playing the masked swordsman Zorro for Disney. He signed on to lead a serious and respectable space drama, fully expecting to be the strong and noble father at the very center of every single story, the man the whole audience would look up to. Instead, he was forced to stand by and watch, as the entire spotlight slowly slid away from him and landed squarely on a comical villain and a chattering robot. Week after week, the best lines, the biggest laughs, and all of the attention from the network went to other people, while his proud and capable character was quietly shrinking into little more than background scenery. The bitterness grew thick and heavy on that set, and the warmth that audiences saw between the cast members was often a careful performance hiding real tension underneath. Guy Williams felt betrayed by a show that had promised him one thing and delivered something else entirely, and that quiet anger never really left him. By the time the cameras finally stopped rolling, he was so disillusioned with the whole business of acting that he made a decision almost nobody saw coming, choosing to walk away from Hollywood completely and disappear into a brand new life on the other side of the planet. Number 10. The star who vanished to another continent and died alone. When the show ended, Guy Williams did something that almost no famous actor ever does, which was to turn his back on fame entirely and simply leave it all behind. He discovered that in the faraway country of Argentina, his old role as the masked hero Zorro had made him an absolute legend, beloved by an entire nation who treated him like royalty whenever he visited. That adoration was a soothing balm on the wound left by Lost in Space, and so he packed up his life and moved to the city of Buenos Aires, choosing the warm love of strangers over the cold memories of the show that had let him down. There is something almost touching and almost tragic about how completely he embraced that new world, because he loved his adopted country so fiercely that he once offered to drive an ambulance for them during a war. He had found a kind of peace there, a fresh start far away from the people and the project that had broken his spirit. He lived quietly in his apartment, surrounded by a city that worshipped him for a role he had played decades earlier, finally free of the show that had pushed him aside. But this peaceful new chapter ended in a way that still aches to think about. Because in 1989, Guy Williams died alone in that apartment from a sudden burst blood vessel in his brain. He was only 65 years old, and several days passed before anyone even discovered that he was gone. And while his story ended in stillness, another man on that same set had spent years suffering a torment that was loud, physical, and nearly fatal. Number 9. The man who cooked alive inside the robot. Everyone remembers the friendly robot, the boxy and lovable machine waving its arms and shouting its warnings. But almost nobody ever thinks about the real human being trapped and suffering inside that costume. A performer named Bob May climbed into that heavy metal suit for nearly every single appearance the robot ever made. And what he endured in there was something close to genuine torture that the cheerful audience at home could never have imagined. The suit was a sealed and stifling prison with almost no way for fresh air to get inside, and the burning hot studio lights pushed the temperature within it to brutal and dangerous levels. The early version of the costume had sharp moving parts that cut into his legs until he bled, and the suffocating heat left him soaked and gasping after only short stretches of filming. He could only survive a limited amount of time sealed inside before he desperately needed to be let out, and the misery of it followed him through every season of the show. He found one small and strange comfort in all of it, which was that he could secretly smoke cigarettes inside the suit during breaks, even fitting it with a little ashtray, much to the alarm of the producer who once feared the whole costume was on fire. What stings the most about all of this is the cruel little irony hiding underneath it. The loyal voice that the robot spoke with belonged to a completely different man, the narrator, Dick Tufeld, while poor Bob May silently sweated and bled inside the metal shell to bring it to life. And here is the truth that must have wounded the human cast so deeply, because this clattering machine and the comical villain received more love and more attention from the network than the show's actual flesh and blood father ever did. That strange and controlling network had its hands all over this show in ways that would shock you. Number 8. The strange rule that forbade the parents from touching. Some of the strangest secrets of this whole story are not about the actors at all, but about the bizarre and controlling decisions handed down from the powerful executives who held the show in their grip. These were the people who shaped what millions of families saw every week. And some of their choices were so peculiar that they sound almost made up. Yet they genuinely happened behind the scenes. One of the most surprising of these rules involved the loving married couple at the heart of the family, the mother and father who were supposed to be the warm and stable center of the entire Robinson household. In the original pilot, they behaved exactly like a real married couple in love, holding hands and sharing small affectionate moments the way actual parents naturally do. But an order came down from the very top of the network demanding that the two of them stop touching each other completely, because the executives had decided that any affection between a husband and wife somehow made the children watching at home feel uncomfortable. The warmth that should have held that fictional family together was quietly stripped away by nervous men in an office who thought love itself was a problem. And this strange meddling from above was only one small piece of a much larger force that was about to completely transform the entire personality of the show, dragging it away from drama and straight into pure, colorful chaos. Number 7. The rival show that turned this drama into a cartoon. People love to blame the network for ruining Lost in Space in a single sweeping moment, telling a tidy little story about one cruel order that flipped the show from serious to silly overnight. The real reason for that dramatic change is far more fascinating, and it has everything to do with a caped crusader who exploded onto television screens at exactly the wrong time for the Robinson family. In the middle of the show's run, a brand new program arrived that took the entire country by storm and changed what audiences wanted from their television. That show was Batman, a wildly colorful and gleefully ridiculous adventure that wore its silliness like a badge of honor, packed with bright costumes, goofy villains, and a wink to the audience in every single scene. People could not get enough of it, and every other show on the air suddenly felt slow and gray and serious by comparison, including the once respected drama about a lost family. So the people steering Lost in Space made a calculated choice to chase that lightning, leaning harder and harder into bright colors, sillier monsters, and the comical antics of Dr. Smith. The transformation was not one cruel command from a villain in a boardroom, but a slow and deliberate slide, as the show desperately reached for the same magic that was making Batman a sensation. And this brings us to the single biggest myth about the show's ending, a legend so widely believed that fans still search for the truth today. Number 6. The secret lost ending that never actually existed. For years and years, a powerful and emotional legend has circulated among the most devoted fans of this show, a story so satisfying that people desperately want it to be real. The legend claims that a beautiful and proper ending was secretly filmed, an episode where the Robinson family finally found their way back home to Earth at long last, complete with tearful reunions and closure for everyone. The story goes that this precious finale was then locked away in a studio vault, deliberately hidden from the heartbroken audience who deserved to see it. It is a wonderful and comforting story, and that is exactly why it is so painful to tell you the truth, which is that this perfect lost ending never actually existed at all. No such homecoming was ever filmed, and there is no dusty reel hidden in some forgotten vault waiting to be discovered. The Robinson family never made it back to Earth, not in any version of the show, because the people making it had no idea their time was almost up. The genuine final episode was shot as a perfectly ordinary chapter, with the family still stranded and still drifting, fully expecting to return for many more adventures the following year. There was no grand goodbye, no triumphant reunion, no closure of any kind. Just the family lost in space, exactly as the title always promised. The emotional ending that fans have mourned for decades was simply a beautiful dream they wished into being. And the reason the show truly ended, the real and unglamorous truth behind its death, comes down to something far colder than any creative decision. Number 5. The real reason the show was quietly killed. When a beloved show suddenly disappears, the audience always assumes something dramatic must have happened, imagining a huge fight or a collapse in popularity that doomed it. The actual reason Lost in Space was canceled is far more ordinary and far more frustrating, and it reveals the cold business machinery that hides behind every show you have ever loved. In the end, this was a story about money, plain and simple. The price of making each episode had been climbing steadily season after season, growing from around $130,000 in the beginning to over $165,000 by the final stretch, which was an enormous sum for television at that time. On top of that rising cost, the network had grown unhappy with exactly who was watching the show, because by the end, it was mostly being adored by young children rather than the older audiences that advertisers were willing to pay the most money to reach. Children loved the silly robot and the comical villain, but children did not buy the products the commercials were selling, and that simple fact made the network nervous. When the executives quietly asked the producer to make the next season for noticeably less money, he flatly refused, insisting that he could not possibly keep the show looking good on a smaller budget. He dug in his heels and would not bend, and so the network simply let the whole thing die rather than pay what he demanded. There was no grand betrayal and no dramatic final battle, just a disagreement over dollars that ended one of the most beloved shows of its era. But the cruelest part of this ending was how the cast found out, because they had been promised something that was suddenly and silently taken away. Number 4. The cast was promised they were coming back. Of all the painful details buried in this story, this one might be the one that lingers with you the longest, because it speaks to a kind of quiet cruelty that anyone who has ever lost a job will recognize in their bones. The people who made this show, the actors who had spent years together becoming a real and bonded family, were genuinely told that they were coming back for another season. New scripts were being written, plans were being made, and everyone settled into the comfortable belief that their beloved show would continue. Then, with no warning and no kindness, the phone calls came, and one by one the cast learned that it was all over and that there would be no return. There was no gentle preparation and no chance to say goodbye properly, just the sudden and jarring news that the family they had built was being permanently torn apart. After everything they had been promised, the rug was pulled out from under them in an instant, leaving them stunned and speechless and grasping for any explanation that made sense. You can only imagine the strange grief of that moment, the way it must have felt to lose your work, your routine, and your second family all at once, because of a quiet argument over budgets that none of them were even part of. They had given years of their lives to this story, and they were sent home with little more than a phone call and a sense of confusion that some of them carried for the rest of their days. Yet for all the pain woven through this story, the show left behind a legacy carried by a young musician whose name you absolutely know. Number 3. The future legend who wrote the music. Hidden inside the credits of this show is a name that would one day become one of the most celebrated and recognized in the entire history of music. A name attached to the most famous movie scores ever composed. The man who created the sweeping and adventurous theme music for Lost in Space, the sound that signaled the start of every thrilling episode, was a young and hungry composer named John Williams, then still going by the more casual name Johnny. If that name is ringing loud bells in your memory, it absolutely should, because this is the very same genius who would later compose the unforgettable music for the greatest films of all time, the soaring scores that defined a galaxy far away, and a shark in the water, and a boy who could fly. Long before he became a household legend, he was sharpening his craft on this little space show, pouring his enormous talent into the music that helped carry the Robinson family through the stars. There is even a popular rumor that he later fought a bitter legal battle with the network over unpaid money for this work, though no real evidence of any such lawsuit has ever actually surfaced, making it just another myth dressed up as fact. It is a beautiful and humbling thought that one of the brightest creative stars in entertainment history once sat quietly behind the scenes of a show that the proud leading man came to resent. The music outlived the drama, the bitterness, and even the cancellation, becoming a small and shining piece of a much larger legend. And the man who built this whole strange world, the showman who started it all, had a reputation that explains nearly every odd choice we have talked about. Number 2. The master of disaster who recycled everything. The creator behind Lost in Space was a larger-than-life showman named Irwin Allen, a man who earned himself a colorful nickname that perfectly captured his entire career. People called him the Master of Disaster because he went on to make some of the biggest catastrophe films of the 1970s, the kind of movies where towering buildings burned and great ships flipped over in the sea. He thought big, and he dreamed big, and that grand ambition was stamped all over everything he ever touched. Yet for all his bold dreaming, Irwin Allen had a famous habit that quietly shaped the look and feel of this show in ways the audience slowly began to notice. He absolutely hated wasting money once the cameras were rolling, and so he recycled props, costumes, monsters, and special effects over and over again across his different shows. A frightening creature might appear in one episode, then show up again weeks later wearing a fresh coat of paint and a new name, hoping nobody would recognize the same old costume underneath. Sharp-eyed viewers spotted the same alien planets and the same spacecraft shots appearing again and again, all because the man in charge refused to spend a single extra dollar. This tight-fisted approach is the thread that ties so much of this story together, from the rising costs that doomed the show to the cheaper and more confined feeling of its final season. Irwin Allen wanted spectacle on a budget, and that constant tension between his big dreams and his tight wallet defined the entire series. He passed away in 1991, leaving behind a complicated and fascinating legacy. And out of all the chaos and conflict and recycled monsters, one tiny phrase survived to outlive every single person involved. After all the betrayal, the bitterness, the suffering, and the secrets, it is almost magical to think that the thing most people remember about this entire show is a single short phrase spoken by a robot to a little boy. The robot's urgent cry of warning, telling young Will Robinson that danger was near, somehow escaped the show entirely and burrowed its way into the everyday language of millions of people who have never even watched a single episode. What makes this ending so quietly moving is the real human bond that lived underneath those famous words, because the actor who played the cowardly Dr. Smith and the young actor who played the boy formed a genuine and tender friendship in real life. The clever villain who stole the whole show became something like a second father to that child actor, handing out sweets to the cast and crew every single day and looking after the boy with real warmth. The young actor would later say with great affection that he loved the older man and that the older man loved him right back. A beautiful truth hiding inside a show so full of quiet conflict. Final and the most surprising secret. So the final and most surprising secret of Lost in Space is that for all the coldness behind the scenes, real love grew there too, the kind that lasted long after the cameras stopped and the show was canceled. The two famous words spoken by that lovable robot became a tiny piece of immortality, carrying the spirit of the whole strange and wonderful story forward through the decades. A serious drama became a comedy. A villain became a hero, and a warning shouted by a machine became something that will likely never be forgotten. So tell me down in the comments, did some part of you always sense there was something a little sad hiding behind all that cheerful adventure? Or did the magic of this show stay perfectly whole in your memory until today?